It's 464 Parshas Tetzaveh. Just first, before we begin, I thought I'd just touch on Purim, since it's coming up. It's like a week away. So with Purim, there are many things that we can talk about, but one of them that I found very interesting is that one of the lines in the Megillah talks about, in regard to Haman, that Haman wants to kill the Jews. So he rationalizes that he just hates the Jews by coming up with reasons that he convinces the king to let him do it. Right? So one of the things he realizes is that the king probably is not going to be so excited about it, because he's going to lose tax revenue. Because you kill thousands and thousands of Jews, they can't pay taxes. And to the government in Iran in those days, that's a big deal. They need the money, especially since the treasury in those days belongs to the king. It's his private bank account, right? So Haman offers 10,000 coins, right, to the king, 10,000 coins, and it says that like the whole story, there's a whole story behind it as to why he offers it, and it says that he says because he wants the king to agree with him, because the king will lose 10,000 coins by killing the Jews. But the commentaries say that it's really a much higher level. It has to. It's based on the fact that in the Megillah it says that Haman says to the king that there is a nation who is spread out and vastly found throughout all of the countries of your kingdom. Right? The king had 127 countries. Right? That's what they conquered. That would be from Nebuchadnezzar, and and there are Jews in every one of those countries. So he says they're spread out among all of your countries. But the commentaries tell us that this is a hint that Haman doesn't realize what he's really saying. And he's saying that the Jewish people are spread out and divisive throughout all of your countries, that they don't get along with each other, that the Jews in each country fight with each other, the Jews between countries fight with each other, Jews just fight with each other. Right? And this is a higher level answer. In other words, Haman certainly meant he's describing the Jews to the king in order to kill them. But the commentaries say that when the book was written, it was written with prophecy. And the prophet is saying, you know why Haman wanted to kill all the Jews? Was because the Jews were fighting with each other. Haman didn't realize this. It was a punishment from God. God tells us we have to get along with each other. We have to work together. We have to respect each other. And we're not doing it. And therefore, Haman is given the ability to wipe out the Jewish people, not necessarily wipe out all of us, but to inflict some type of punishment on us, even though he doesn't realize that what he's doing is coming from God, because, as he said, the Jewish people are spread out and they're divisive through all of your countries. So that's a higher level. And I talk often in my lectures and my classes about the importance of respecting each other and treating each other with dignity and all of the things that go with it as important as everything else is in the Torah. And very often we forget that. We think that, we understand you have to be nice to people, but you have to put on tefillin, you have to keep Shabbos, you have to keep kosher. But the fact is, I think we have it backwards. You do have to do all of those mitzvahs, but we see over and over and over again the foundation of Jewish life is based on how we treat people. And here's an example, which is not the only example, of the Jewish people being potentially killed because they were fighting with each other. So the commentaries tell us that a quote is said in the Medrash. It says, "Oh, you evil person, the Jews have already won up to you." That is, when Haman wanted to kill them in order to and pay these coins. So it says that the Jews had already given coins to God. And we have a mitzvah that God says of giving half a shekel, and half of a coin, right, to the temple. And it's done right before Purim, this mitzvah. And it says, and why specifically half a shekel, the commentaries ask? Because each Jew needs to know that they're not complete when they're alone. They're only complete when with others. Be it, you want to make it a talk about marriage, just when your spouse. You talk about the idea of humanity, of the Jewish people getting along with each other. You're only complete when you unite together with other people. So here, the whole story is that Haman sees the Jewish people are fighting, and the Jewish people are doing it. They are fighting. However, the prophets foresaw this, And they made it so the Jews should understand that this mitzvah of giving half a shekel should teach them that they shouldn't fight and they should get along. And then certainly, as soon as you see in the story of the Megillah, suddenly the Jewish people all unite, right? They all unite together, right, in this battle that's being waged against them. Okay. So it says that it's a direct correlation between the idea of the story of Purim happened because the Jews were fighting with each other, and the way in the end that God saved us was by our understanding the symbolism behind the mitzvah of giving half a coin, half a shekel.
Because somebody else has to give the other half.
That's right, and each one of us give the other half, and you don't, and nobody, no matter how rich you are, is allowed to give a full shekel. You can only give half, so that you have to realize that you aren't a one until you're with someone else. And as soon as we understood that, then we knew that Haman's not going to succeed, because ultimately, when times are serious, we do unite, and we should unite all the time. But certainly, we know, sadly, that in times of distress, the Jewish people unite, and it's unique. You know, it's a famous story that when there was blood libels in Europe, right? And you know the blood libels where they accuse the Christians or the Catholics accuse the Jews of killing children and using their blood to make matzah, which is so absurd of all the things to accuse of stuff, but that's what they did. And every once in a while in different cities they would find a dead child, and in the proximity would be a Jew, and they would say, here's an example, and they would bring them up on charges. So there was a case that was one of the last famous cases that happened. And I actually, sadly, I forgot the name of the person, but I should remember it because it was very popular. They made a movie out of it, all types of things out of it. And worldwide Jewry, right, went to help this guy. People like Rothschild and others who had never met this poor man living in a little town in Russia who was being accused of a blood libel. But what he's really being accused of is being a Jew. Right? They went and gave money, and they helped, and they did everything they could. Jews around the world were praying for him, were giving money to help him, right? All around the world. So in the times of trouble, the Jews united. And in fact, one of the very interesting points that came up was that it became clear that the non-Jewish government, of course, in those days, that was before communism, it was under the Tsar, that the non-Jewish government was anti-Semitic. And they were using this as a tool to not only prove that the Jews do this, but that Judaism hates non-Jews. And so the lawyer that was hired to represent this Jewish person by international Jewry received a list of questions that was going to be asked in the case. And one of the questions was a quote from the Talmud. The Talmud says that the nations of the world are not called human. Only the Jewish people are called human. I'm purposely translating it the way he did, right, where the anti-Semites translated it. What it says, Ein umas ha'olam karim adam. You know, the umas ha'olam, or the nations of the world, are not called Adam. Adam is a name for a human, right? You know, we are Adam, bnei Adam. We are people. They're not called Adam. Only the Jewish people are called Adam. So the lawyer, not being educated in Jewish literature, says, you know, we're in trouble. They're going to bring this up in court, and it sort of shows that the Jews think that non-Jews are animals, and you know, and they're going to be able to prove their point. So he went to see who's known as the Chernobyl Rebbe, and he said to him, I need an answer. How do I answer this? So he explained the following. He said, when you get a French person, right, and he's left France, and now he lives, I'm updating it, and now he lives in New York, and he has children, and his children are born in New York and live in New York, but they come from French background, right? They have French foods that they eat, and there's certain things in their house that are French that they talk about, and part of the culture they've taken for themselves. Right? There's all of this, right, is, you know, part of their background of who they are. And a French person, right, who is in Algeria gets arrested, right, and it's a sham. Right? It's the government in Algeria is trying to accuse him of something. Do all the French people, like these French people whose grandparents came from France, do they unite together and give money and worry and cry and pray over this fellow who was from France, but he's in Algeria? They don't. They're concerned about, they're not being cruel. They care about regular people, right? But they don't think, oh my God, could this be? He's our brother. He comes from France. And even though it's only our grandparents who came from France, we're still French. We have to help him. They don't do that, right? The world does not do that, but the Jewish people do, right? So now let's look at, why do we call people Adam, man? Right? Why does the word Adam, which is the name of a man, the first man's name was Adam. That was his name, Adam. Why do we call the people Adam? Because all people came from Adam. All human beings come from Adam. It's one thing, you can convert to be a Jew, but you can't convert to be a human. You either are born human or you're not born human. And every human comes from Adam. So to Adam, every human being is his family. And he would care about every human being because they all came from him. They're his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, but they all come from him. So the Rebbe says that's what the Talmud means. The nations of the world do not see each other as Adam does, as relatives. But the Jewish people, they see all Jews, no matter how distant they are from Judaism, no matter how far removed they are from Jewish practice, every Jew sees every other Jew as their own brother. And they will give money, and they will cry, and they will get together, and every time they get together, they'll say, is that good for the Jews? What's going on with the Jews? What do you hear about the Jews? Right? And they'll be sitting in Miami Beach, on the beach, and they'll say, did you hear about this guy in Russia who got arrested? We have to do something about it. And they'll give money, and they'll cry, and they'll help. Right? Only the Jewish people are called Adam. Only the Jewish people feel about each other like their family. Right? That's what that Talmud means. That's the message of this story of Haman. That Haman says, I look around at the Jewish people, and they're all fighting with each other. Right? They don't get along with each other. So if they can't get along with each other, they certainly aren't going to get along with us. So let's get rid of them. That's what he tells the king. But on a higher level, the prophet is saying that it's true. The Jews are fighting with each other. So we're going to preempt it. We're going to teach the Jews the lesson that you're only a whole person when you're with another person. You're only half a shekel. You're only half a coin. When you give half a coin, you have to realize you need to be a whole coin. When the Jews did that, and God said they need to learn to do it, so the story of Purim is going to happen, but he won't be successful. I won't let Haman win, because the Jews ultimately do care. And from that story, we learned the lesson very strongly of how important it is for us to all get along. And throughout history, we keep having to learn that lesson. It's a lesson that sadly we keep forgetting. And because I hear it all the time when I meet people who aren't observant, and they'll always come and talk about, the Orthodox Jews. They do this and they do this and this, things that aren't nice. And every example they give me is how an Orthodox Jew treats another person. They never say that Orthodox Jew doesn't keep Shabbos. That Orthodox Jew doesn't keep kosher. He only pretends to keep kosher. You never hear that. It's, did you see that? He parked in the fire lane. He drives 80 miles an hour on the shoulder of the road when everybody else is stuck in a traffic jam. Did you see that? That he was made a Ponzi scheme, or he took advantage of the government, or he went and he said that he needed welfare, and when he didn't need welfare. That's what you always hear. Why? Because the world looks at as us as saying Orthodox Jews are to be judged on a higher level because they are supposed to live on a higher level. All Jews should live on this level, but an Orthodox Jew says he does. And look at that, how he treats. But you'll notice that they're always commenting on how we treat people. And that's because they're right. It's correct. What they're saying is that we're going to judge Orthodox Jews by a higher standard, and they should judge Orthodox Jews by another standard because we claim to be. But the standard is not how well we keep Shabbos, or that do I wait 72 minutes after sunset, or only 42 minutes after sunset, or do I have long payas, or do I don't have long payas? Nobody comments on that. They only comment on how we treat people, and their point is correct. If we don't treat people correctly, then the foundation of Judaism is rotten, right? And it's not the Torah that's rotten, it's the practicers that is rotten. That's why we see it all the time throughout history, that I can say, I'm not a historian, but I think I'd stick my neck out and say that every single time that there has been a real destruction of the Jewish people throughout history, it has been because we didn't treat each other correctly. You don't see it saying, oh, the temple was destroyed because you didn't keep Shabbos. No, it says because you killed each other. And it doesn't say that the second temple was destroyed because we didn't keep kosher. It says temple was destroyed, right, because we fought with each other. We didn't get along with each other. We turned each other into the government. We did things to hurt each other. But time and time again, we keep seeing the same message. That's the message in Purim as well. It's a message in our life too. So I just wanted to touch on it because Purim is the holiday that we celebrate this idea so that we all can understand better how significant and important it is for us to really make sure that the way we treat people is with dignity. And of course, I don't want to at all diminish the importance of the other mitzvahs, keeping kosher, keeping Shabbos, all the other ones are important. They're very important. But the problem is that we often diminish the other ones, the ones where how I treat people and how I act with people. And if we really did have a community, if the Orthodox Jewish community really was like the Torah tells us, then everybody would want to live there. You could imagine you'd have a community and you have widows. They never have to bring in take out their garbage. They never have to bring in their groceries because everybody's taking care of them. And nobody dies and you find out a month later because everybody cares for each other. And, you have a man and he gets sick, right? His grass isn't going to grow 2 feet tall. Someone will cut it for him. Somebody will make sure that they have food. That's what the community is supposed to be like. That's what the Torah says the Jewish community should be. That's when it tells us that we're supposed to be a light to nations. We always hear that line. It's such an odd expression. Right? What does it mean, a light to nations? What does a light do? So we think it means enlightenment, but it doesn't really, I don't think. In my opinion, I think what it means is that a light, you turn on a light bulb. The light bulb doesn't go anywhere, right? And suddenly, though, everybody looks at the light. As soon as you turn it on, everyone looks at it. Until then, you don't look at it. You could even have light in the room. But suddenly I turn a light bulb on and everybody looks at the light bulb because we're drawn to the light. That's right. Our attention is drawn to the light. And I think that's what it means. It says we're supposed to be a light into nations. It doesn't mean we missionize. It means we should live in our communities and make it so that if anybody comes and sees how we live, they want to be like us. They're going to look at us and they're going to see, wow, I can live in this community and the poor people are taken care of and the older people are taken care of and the orphans are taken care of. And it's nice, and you don't have to worry about crime. And if there is crime, people take care of each other. That's where I want to live. And it'll happen is that other Jews will start to live there, and non-Jews want to live that way. Right? And schools will want to live like that. And suddenly their communities will get larger and larger and larger. But it's not happening because we're not doing it. Right? We're doing some of it. Right? There's wonderful stories of some of the great acts of kindness and the organizations of kindness that we have that other groups of our size don't. It's like I went in Massachusetts and I was working for the UJA many years ago. And one year, the UJA raised more money than the United Way. And he said, how is that possible? Because United Way is the whole city. But the UJA is only the Jews in the city. But yet the Jews in the city gave more money than the entire city gave to United Way, right? Which is odd, but it made sense because there are many examples of how we do live the way we're supposed to live. We do those things where we care for each other, where we really do feel each other's pain. So I'm not diminishing it, but I can only imagine what it'd be like if we really did, those things to the extreme, where you outside and you made sure everybody was taken care of and nobody was left alone and nobody was forgotten. And when Passover came, everyone had a place to go. And it was Purim, everyone got a shalach manas, right? And when somebody is not feeling well, somebody was there to help them, right? Every single time. And that would be an amazing thing. That's what this story is. The Purim story is one of the messages of it, is the importance of that. And the truth is almost every other story, it's the message as well, because we keep seeing it. No, that's just Purim. So now let's take a look at the Parsha for whatever we have left after I've used up all the time. Parsha Tetzaveh is the next of the Parshas that on a simple level appears really to be sort of mundane, dealing with things that you don't really think have much to do with the inspirational Torah. Like, there was no Abraham, no Isaac, no Jacob. In fact, this is the one parsha, the only parsha in the entire Torah from the birth of Moshe till the end of the Torah that Moshe's name is not in. He's not found in here at all. Now, why is that? So it says, one of the commentaries called the Baal HaTurim tells us the reason is because Moshe went to God and he told God, and we see it earlier in the Torah, when the Jews are praying to the red calf, to the golden calf, right? Moshe comes down the mountain and the Jews are worried he's not going to come back. So they decide, God's left us. Moshe's left us. We're here in the desert all by ourselves. We better find our own God. And they go and they put all their money together and they make a calf out of gold and they start praying to it. And it says that God, it says like, what's with you guys? I just gave you the Torah. I just took you out of Egypt. I just split the Red Sea. So Moshe says he'll be back in the 40th day. You think he'll come back in the morning. He's coming back in the afternoon. What are you doing? Right? I'm only, after all I've done, I'm only worth a couple hours of wait. Right? You doubt me already? So he tells Moshe, I'm going to destroy them. I'm going to destroy all the Jews. I'm going to start over again from you. You will be the. Moshe says, if you do this, take me out of your Torah. I want nothing to do with you anymore. That's it. The Jewish people are my people. You made me in charge, and if you are going to destroy them, take me out of the book. I don't want to be in your Torah. So the words of a righteous person are always followed. So God took him out of this parsha. He's not in this parsha because God listened to him. Now, many people say that this was like a punishment for Moshe. His name was taken out of the Torah because he stood up to God like that, right? He was chutzpahdik. Other commentaries tell us that it's just the opposite. That if you look closely, you see that this was one of the greatest praises of Moshe. Because Moshe, in the silence of him not being in this parsha, is telling you that Moshe was willing to give up everything for us, right? Like a mother for her children. He's willing to give up everything to save the Jewish people. Even, forget me, just leave me out. You're not going to start the Jewish people with me. I'm done, right? You destroy the Jewish people that you put me in charge of. I want nothing to do with this anymore.
Is that a test from God? Because God didn't really have to notify Moshe until he was going to do
well, actually, it says that. God says, in a couple of places, you have this with Abraham also, when he's going to destroy Sodom. So he says, how can I do something like this and not tell my beloved Abraham, he says, in that case, because he doesn't have to tell him, but he feels it's appropriate. He says, Moshe, stand aside, stop praying for them. You are the greatest human in the history of the world, so you be praised, be happy. Your children, everyone coming from you, are going to be the new Jewish people. So that's so bad. And Moshe is thinking on a higher level. I'm taking care of these people. Because sometimes Moshe gets pretty upset with them. He says at one point, what am I, a nursing mother? I have to suckle all of these people? It's like for their entire lives? They can't take care of themselves. Every time there's a problem, they want to go back to Egypt. Every time they say something, they're rebelling, they're insulting me. And there's times when he gets frustrated. But when the chips are down, he's there for them. So that's how we see it. So that's why he's not in here. That's why his name's not in here. So
you always get warning from Hashem, either by punishment, or always get some kind of warning, though.
That's true. Whenever God is going to do something harsh, yes, but you have to know what is his goal. Like God's goal was not to find a reason to destroy the Jews. God's goal was for the Jews to act correctly. So by him letting Moshe, in the end, letting Moshe stand up for them and letting us know that he did that, that's a very powerful message for us. If you have a father and your father goes to fight for you, let's say the school says you have to come to school on Saturday, right? And now you're okay. You keep Shabbos because your family keeps Shabbos. Maybe you're not that committed at this point. And your father goes and he goes to war with the school for you, right? And he wins. Are you going to go to school on Saturday? Oh, you're not going to go because your father just went to war for you. Look how much my father loves me, and it's so important to him. I'm not going to break this rule. I'm going to follow it. If not for God, then because of my father. So then they learned the lesson from Moshe.
Doesn't that make them believe more in Moshe, not in
No, because ultimately Moshe is doing it for God, right? Moshe is doing it for that reason, but they feel gratitude to Moshe and are more committed to God because Moshe is more committed to God. It's like having a mentor.
Right.
You have a mentor who loves Beethoven. You may have little interest in Beethoven, but after a while, because you love your mentor, you feign an interest in Beethoven, and eventually you do have an interest in Beethoven, right? And I think that's what he's doing here. So let's look at a little bit. So we get to see, first they talk all about the various clothing that the Kohen wears. And the Kohen is the only Jew who has a uniform. Even the army, you don't see them talking about a uniform. But the Kohen has a uniform, and it's detailed here. That's a very regal uniform because they're representing God to us and us to God. So it's very majestic and beautiful colors and jewels. But what's very interesting is that it's uniform, and the word uniform really sends us a message because they're wearing very regal clothes, right? But they're all wearing the same clothes. They're a uniform. Like that's why in the army today, why do they wear a uniform? And it's so important that it looks the exact same, is because they want you to have the frame of mind that you are nobody by yourself. You're only important because you're part of the team. You're part of the army. So you have to not act on your own. You have to act the way we tell you. We give you an order and you think the order is wrong. You better do the order. Right? So one of the ways they do that is by making you dress the same, so you start to relate as if you're part of a group, not as an individual. And the Kohanim have that as well. While the Kohanim have it on a high level, it's that when you go to, if you need a Kohen, if you're going to go to the temple and offer a sacrifice, you don't pick the Kohen. They're all the same. Every Kohen, right, is special because it's not the Kohen that you're going to. It's God you're going to. The Kohen is the messenger of God. He's the assistant of God. It's not that, it's like when you go, to the bank and you give money to the teller, you're not giving the teller money. You're putting the money in the bank, right? When you go to the Kohen to offer a sacrifice for you, if the Kohen is doing his job correctly, then every Kohen is the same, right? It's extremely important that that message is sent across to the people so they don't start to pick, I want this Kohen, I want that Kohen. Because to be a Kohen was not only very illustrious, but many Kohanim were very wealthy because they were given a lot of things. So, every time there's a sacrifice, they got a piece of it, right? Be it food, be it worth money. There are all kinds of things that they had. And if you look at the excavations in Jerusalem that they found, many of the homes in the old city that are like 10 bedrooms, they find homes that from the first temple, talking about like close to 2,500 years ago, with 8 or 9 bedrooms, with 5 or 6 mikvahs inside of the house. All kinds of things. These were almost all exclusively homes of Kohanim because they had to be in the city to work in the temple, and they had access to a lot of money legally. They weren't stealing it. There was money because of their job. They were very special that way. It was part of the privilege of being a Kohen. And the people supported them because the Kohen couldn't have a job. He couldn't. If a guy is a Kohen and decides he wants to be a truck driver, he can't. If the Kohen wants to be a lawyer, he can't. He can't be an accountant. He's a Kohen. That's what he is. Right? So therefore, the people pay him, right, so that he can live. And some of them did very well. Right? But in any case, it wasn't one Kohen versus the other. They were all the same. And that's why one of the main reasons that they wear a uniform is every piece of the uniform has significance. But the uniform itself, they were all the same, except for the Kohen Gadol. You see him on 473, you actually see an illustration of him. The Kohen Gadol was unique. He was the high priest. He had rules that nobody else had, and they were all restrictive. Like he would basically live in the temple for the most part. He was different than like other Kohanim. You have laws, like a Kohen can't marry a divorced woman. Right? Well, a Kohen, there's nothing wrong with a divorced woman. There's nothing innately wrong with a divorced woman. Maybe she married a crazy guy, right? And nothing to do with her. But a Kohen can't do it. But the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, had to marry a virgin. Not just was she unmarried, but he's the only one like that had that rule. And it was, and maybe we can discuss it, go into it, but it's really the idea behind it was the Kohen is not a person, individual. He's representative of God. And if there's anything about the Kohen that people, even if they're wrong, would be disparaging of him, then he couldn't do it, even if they're wrong. Right? So, for instance, if a Kohen had one eyebrow, right, you know, all the way across, he couldn't be a Kohen. He couldn't serve as a Kohen. He didn't lose his status. He just couldn't work in the temple. If he had one arm shorter than the other, he couldn't work as a Kohen. Not because there was something wrong with him, but because there was a perception. The outside, I'm looking at God. He represents God. God is perfect. And this man's not perfect. So it's sad, but it's part of the reality. It's like, you know, I tell people today, when, you know, most of my life I was significantly overweight. And about 7 years ago, I got serious about losing weight. And I thank God I've been able to keep it. And I can't say why. It's just I've been able to keep it down. But I lost probably 60 pounds. And the difference, right, was enormous. But one of the things I tell people when I'm counseling, and one of the issues they have is that they're overweight, is that as much as we like to say that you can't judge a person because they're overweight, everybody does. They do. My career was stunted because I was overweight. There's no question in my mind. People think that overweight people are stupid, that they're slobs, right? And why slobs? Because clothes aren't made for us. A designer does not make clothes for a person who's 50 pounds overweight. He makes it for a person in normal size. So you have to buy clothes that are 5 sizes larger, and they're made for a person 7 inches taller than you. So you don't look right, right? Is it right? No, it's not right. It's not right, right? Is it right that attractive women in general have it easier in the public than a woman who's not? It's not right, but it's true, right? So in the case of a Kohen, it's also not right. People shouldn't act that way. And the God is not saying because I'm making these rules that it's okay to act that way. It's not. It's a reality. People do this. And when they're representing God, they have to have an appearance of perfection. And therefore, they dress all the same. They pretty much look the same. They act the same. And they have certain rules on who they can be with. Like, you know, today we don't think twice about a woman who was divorced. Right? We really don't. It's nothing. But when I was a kid, they did. And I'm not that old. I remember there was only 1 or 2 women in our neighborhood who were divorced. But there always was like snickering about her, you know, from the adults. I didn't know. I didn't understand what it was. But I can remember it. Right? And probably some of you remember the same thing. Because society looked at it, a divorced woman, it was her fault. Even chances are it wasn't. But that's how people looked at them, right? So he couldn't marry a divorced woman because of that kind of thing. So that's where in my opinion at least, and some of the commentaries, so that's where some of this idea comes from as to why the Cohens had those rules. And
how was the Cohen chosen? I mean, who chose them?
Well, they were chosen among their brothers, right? And then they had to actually perform. And if they were inappropriate, they wouldn't last the year. They would die. Because it says that when you went into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, if you weren't appropriate and you weren't able to do the job at the high spiritual level you needed, you would die. And during the second temple, I think it was the second temple, the time when the government influenced the Jews to seize the position of Kohen Gadol, the money, right? And so they had these Kohen Gadols, which I don't know how it shows you how your ego is so strong. They had to know they were going to die, that they would go into the Holy of Holies and they would die. In fact, they had a rule: they would tie a rope to their leg because a regular person wasn't allowed to go into the Holy of Holies, and the guy would die in there. They couldn't go get him. So they tie a rope to his leg so they could pull him out. And yet this kept happening, and they kept doing it. So under the right circumstances, the Kohen Gadol could be the Kohen Gadol for a long time, right? But under the wrong circumstances, they wouldn't live a year. So that's how they knew that they had the right.
But doesn't having this holiness create a sense of elitism and jealousy and animosity on the other sects of Judaism, that these people think that they're higher than everybody else and God expects more from them?
Part of the idea is that why Aaron was the one whose family, right, his children were the priests, because he was known to be from a family of humble people, so that wouldn't be the case. It probably happened, right? But that was a corruption. was it was specifically given to people who understood the humility they had to have to be with other people. That this is my role. I didn't pick this role. This was thrust on me. Not much different than, it's not as common today, but the role of the firstborn son in the family in Jewish tradition is thrust on you. I'm the firstborn son in my family. There's not much I have to do today because society is different. But in those days, like if my father died, I had to take care of my mother. Right? You know, it says that the firstborn son gets double in the inheritance. He does, but he also gets the mother and all the sisters. He has to take care of them. He doesn't necessarily come out ahead, right? He's responsible for that. He has to take care of them. And so there was, you know, is it a privilege? Yeah, it's a privilege. People, you know, you'd hear, oh, your firstborn son, right? Every culture talks about it, but you have to put it in perspective to understand. But is there corrupt people who did it? Sure there were. There were probably people who had enormous egos, especially if they made a lot of money and they lived well. But as soon as you became that way, you started failing in your job because you couldn't be arrogant and be a Kohen. It wouldn't work. It would be like, you know, a lawyer, because it has supposed to be a certain amount of being argumentative, but if he's known for being humble, he's probably not going to be a successful lawyer. A Kohen who's known for being argumentative is not going to be a successful Kohen because he won't last. Not that people won't use him because they can't choose, but he's eventually will be ostracized. Like people won't want to associate with him. So
you weren't born into the confinement type of tribe. You couldn't get into it. You had to be born into it.
As a Kohen? Yeah. A Kohen. In fact, the only way.
I want to be a Kohen. I'm changing my.
You can't. No, there's famous jokes about it. Like they have a joke where a guy goes to the rabbi and he tells the rabbi, I want to be a Kohen. I'll give you $100,000. And the rabbi says, I can't do it. I mean, they said, I'll give you $200,000. I can't do it. You have to be a Kohen. I can't make you a Kohen. He says, I'll give you $1 million. And he says, why do you want to be a Kohen so much? He says, well, you know, my father was a Kohen. My grandfather was a Kohen. So I said, okay. Right.
It's like, you know, the rabbis that are today, it's like, you know, it goes from generation to generation.
Yeah, and not all of them are appropriate, but most of them are.
Not all.
Right? Right. They have like lots of stories about with the Kohen where with the Rebbe, that they tell a story once that there was a famous Rebbe and he had two sons and the Rebbe died unexpectedly. So he didn't appoint one of his sons to take over. So the older son and the younger son both said they were going to take over. And this happens. It happens today. Like we have today, like with Satmar, 2 different Rebbes. You have with other groups 2 different Rebbes. So they didn't know who's going to take over. So the younger son went to the Hasidim one day, to like the leaders. And he said, I can prove I'm the Rebbe. He said, well, how? He said, last night I had a dream. Father came to me in my dream. And he said, call the elders and tell them you're the Rebbe. So I'm coming to you and telling you, my father came to me last night in a dream, I'm the Rebbe. And the elders looked at him and they said, if your father wanted you to be the Rebbe, he would have come to us in the dream, not you. Right? That's the idea. Right? But Rebbes, you know, they have, not only did they have genetic, you know, like because of where they came from, it was genetic, but also their upbringing was special. And many of them were very extraordinary people. And that's why they are who they are. Right? It's not only because they're the son of a Rebbe. It's also some of it is genetic, some of it is they're raised in the house of the Rebbe. What he was like. And they themselves will excel in their own way. Like if you look at the Hasidim of Ger, the Rebbes of Ger, each one of them was different than the one before, but they also had a similarity. Right? So sometimes they were, one Rebbe was, you know, more delving into this way, and this one's delving in this way, but they had certain similarities because they had a following that was united and that was used to a certain approach. But they were all great people, right? And extraordinary people, and the more you study them, the more you find out about them. Okay. So let me see.
Why would the balsamic and the oil so important to the the spices?
Well, the spices and oil are important, firstly, because God commanded them to be, right? But I'll tell you, in light of Purim, is there something to add with Purim that has to do with this? There's a very strange Talmud, quote in the Talmud. We have a belief that everything is in the Torah. Everything and everyone. Like, you're in the Torah. If you have the ability to find yourself, you're in there. And it'll tell you something about yourself. Most of us today can't do that. But there were people who could do it, and the Talmud tells us that everything is in there. So it says, so in this story, it says, well, where is Haman in the Torah? So it says, from a quote from of Genesis, of Bereshit, Hamin ha'etzaveh, which means from this tree. Talking about the tree of knowledge that you're not supposed to eat from, but since the Torah doesn't have vowels, the word Hamin is the same word as Haman. In Hebrew, it's the same word, except there it's Hamin, the, from the, and Haman is Haman's name, but they're spelled Hey Mem Nun, same way, without vowels. So that the Talmud says that's Haman. He's found in the Torah, right? He comes from the tree. So I was talking about the tree of knowledge, right? Then it says, okay, smart guy, where's Esther in the Torah? So later on it says Esther he Hadassah in the Megillah, and in the Torah it says Esther had two names, Esther and Hadassah, right? There were two names she had. And then it says in the Torah, it talks about Hadassah, Hadassim, like with your lulav and esrog, one of the things that had a fragrance. But it also says, Hester, Esther, Panai. God says, I will hide my face from you. There'll be a time in history where you won't see me, but I'll be there. I'll be hidden. And the word Hester and Esther are the same word. Esther, the name of the woman, and Hester, to be hidden. That's another. And then it says Mordechai. Where's Mordechai in the Torah? Mordechai is not even a Hebrew word. Right? It's an Aramaic word. And it says, oh, that's easy. It's in the spices. And it says Mordoror. Mordoror is a spice, and if you put it together, it's like Mordechai. So it says there's Mordechai in the Torah. So people say this is ridiculous. What kind of Talmud? The Talmud, which is an enormously important book of Jewish philosophy of law, it's basically God-given. Why does it tell us this silly story? Like Haman is like a tree. Like Haman wasn't around then. Okay, he's in the Torah, but so it's sending us a very interesting message. You'll notice that all three things, Haman, Mordecai, and Esther, all three of them are relating to a fragrance, to a smell. Esther is Hadassah. Hadassim are myrtles, which have a smell but no taste. That's when they're in our lulav and esrog. Right? It has a smell but no taste. Mordecai was Mordoror, which is a spice that we used in the temple, and it says that in the Torah. And Haman is Ham bin Ha'etz. He came from this tree, and it was a fragrant tree. So we have three things with fragrances. Right? That's what we're talking about. So it says if you look at the story of creation, where it talks about Adam and Eve, and it says that Eve was spoken to by the snake, and she spoke to the snake, and she saw the fruit, and she tasted the fruit, and she touched the fruit, right? She spoke to her husband, Adam, right? Nowhere does it mention the sense of smell. 4 out of 5 senses are involved in what we call the original sin, the first sin. 4 out of 5 senses. Touching, right? She touched it, and it says it explicitly. I'm not adding to the words. The words say she touched it. She spoke to the snake. She spoke to her husband. She heard the snake. She tasted the fruit. But nowhere does it say anything about the sense of smell. And from this, it says that the sense of smell was not corrupted in the sin from Gan Eden. That the sense of smell is on a higher spiritual level than all of our other senses. And I can prove that. That's easy. Because the sense of smell, for anyone who's sensitive to it, you can smell something that can cause you to have memories from your childhood that you didn't even know that you forgot. But not only that, it can cause an amazing effect in your life. For instance, there used to be in the promenade, they had Saint Cinnamons. Remember that? St. Cinnamon's has certain rules on their franchises. One is it has to be near the escalator, right? And why? Because when you're going up the escalator, you're stuck, right? And you get it closer you get, the more you smell the cinnamon buns, and you'll get hungry, right? Now, they didn't bake cinnamon buns in there. They had a fragrance. They had an aerosol that would spray this smell into the walkway at the promenade and everywhere they are. And it would go down the escalator and you would want to eat it. So you would literally get hungry, want to eat it, and spend your money because of a sense of smell. One, right? Another one is, I remember speaking once to a real estate agent who used to stage homes. One of the things they tell you to do when you stage your home is that your goal is that when someone comes into your home, you don't want them to buy a house. You want them to buy a home. That's what they're looking for, a home. There's a million houses. There's only one home for them. The house they buy will be their home. So you do is you take a pot and you put butter in the pot and you warm that butter and you leave it at a low flame on the stove before the open house, and you leave it that way. And when people walk in, they will smell the melting butter. And anyone over the age of 30 is going to bring them back to their childhood. And they're going to remember their mother melting butter to cook with. And they're going to have this enormous reaction to your house that's going to be their home, right? And they don't even know it. But that sense of smell does it. And there was one other that I tell people when I discuss Shiva with them. I tell them how people will tell me often, you know, I'm not religious. I can't keep 7 days of Shiva. I'm only going to keep 3 days. I'm not going to keep any days. I didn't like my father. I'm not going to do anything. Whatever they tell me. And I say, look, most of these are non-members, right? People who once in a while, you know, the funeral home will ask the rabbis to step in and help for people who don't have rabbis. So when I talk to them, I say, look, you know, you asked me the question. I'm giving you the answer. I'm not going to force you to do something. I said, but I'm going to tell you something. I said that traditionally, a person who goes through grief, goes through 4 stages of grief. Modern psychology will tell you this, but the rabbis who really worked thousands of years ago on Shiva knew this, even though modern psychology thinks they invented this in the 1960s. And those are, you have denial, you have, denial is the first one, you have anger, you have guilt, and then you have acceptance. And everyone who goes through mourning will go through all 4 things. You will have denial, which is you don't think they're dead. Consciously you know it, but subconsciously you don't. I have it. My mother's been gone over 20 years, and I will reach for the phone to call her when something good happens to me. So in my psyche, it hasn't fully accepted it, right? That's the first level. The second one is guilt. I should have done this. I should have been there more often. I should have not listened to the doctor. I should have listened to the doctor. That's guilt. And then the next one, right, is anger. I'm mad at God. I'm mad at my father for dying. I'm mad at this person. I'm mad at that person. Why? That's just how we are. And then finally we come to acceptance. Shiva does that. In 1 week, you can actually see people go through this, at least on a basic level. If you don't sit Shiva, you will sit Shiva. That's it. You don't sit Shiva when it's appropriate, you will sit Shiva inappropriately. Some other time, it's going to hit you, and you know you're going to be in the middle of a ski slope somewhere. And you're going to fall apart because you didn't do it. And I'm not talking about your religious obligation. This is a psychological reality. You will go through it. So again, I told this to people. Only once did I ever have someone come back to me. This guy comes back to me and he tells me that he was also in the promenade waiting for his wife who was shopping. And he was sitting on one of these benches. Sit on your wife to go shopping. Nothing. All the guys are sitting there. And he's, I don't know, playing with his phone or reading something. And he notices in the corner of his eye, like a figure walking behind him, but they're still a distance away. And they're getting closer and closer. And he thinks that this person has a similar physique to his mother who had died. But, you know, lots of women have a similar physique. She's getting closer and closer and closer, and he ignores her. And she walks behind him, and he smells her perfume, which was the same perfume his mother wore. And he said, I fell apart in the mall as if my mother had just died. That's what he told me. He said the fragrance of her perfume affected him so deeply that he like literally was like sitting Shiva like 9 months later in the mall because he didn't do it appropriately. And I'm not saying this is a religious thing or that God punished him. This is totally physical and psychological. It happened to him, right? Because of fragrance. Fragrance is extremely strong and spiritual, and therefore it's used in the temple, right? It's also the whole story of Purim, right, was, according to the Talmud, was coming to fix the original sin of Adam and Eve. And therefore, every character in the story is based on the sense of smell. And if you go through the story with this knowledge, you can actually see, example after example, where it plays a role. But you have to do it on a deeper level. You'll actually see how that happens. And that it says at the end of the story that the Jews were able to unite together, right? Like, what does it say about Mordecai at the end? It says Mordecai was the king, and he was royalty. Then it says, and he was beloved. He was beloved by all his brothers and all of his children. It's a sign that the Jews united. The whole story, they didn't unite. At the end, you see they did. And part of that had to do with the fact that they, on a Kabbalistic level, a deeper level, it was this fragrance, right? It was the actions of the people who all were tied together through this idea of fragrance, which was not corrupted in the first sin, and their actions were such that they caused the people to unite, and then the Jewish people were saved, right? So I'm not doing it justice, but just answering your question, and that's really how we see it in that story of of really what happened there.
What was the fragrance?
What was the what?
What was the fragrance in Torah?
Well, it was just each name had to do with the
the
fragrance,
name.
right?
Okay.
Esther was a fragrance. Mordecai was a fragrance. Haman was a fragrance. They were all fragrances. They're all alluding to fragrances, right? Because remember, the question was, where is Esther in the Torah? Meaning, what the essence of Esther is in the Torah, not Esther.
Okay.
She came 1,000 years later.
Okay.
Her essence was in the Torah, and that was the fragrance. So that we got there. All right, we'll just take just one more example from here. Let's talk a minute about this. The whole second section of the Parsha, 480, 481, 479, deals with sacrifices. Sacrifices are very misunderstood in our society. We think sacrifices come from the word sacrifice, which means I take something and I waste it. I'm wasting it for God. I'm saying I want God to do what I want. So I'm going to take this cow, which cost me $10,000. I'm going to just destroy it to show God I love him, so he'll do things for me. I'm bribing him. When the ancient take a young girl and throw her into a what were they saying? They're saying, here's this young girl. She has so much to offer. She's beautiful. She's never been with a man. And we're willing to give her up as a bribe to God so that God should give us all wealth and successes here. Right? That's where it came from. That's ancient society's idea of sacrifices. Sacrifices were sacrificed, wasted. That in Hebrew, that's not the word. In Hebrew, it doesn't say sacrifice. It says korban. And korban comes from the word to go close. These animals, these sacrifices, were used to bring us close to either each other or God. And because of something that we did or that God wants us to do. Excuse me. When we had a sacrifice, you didn't waste it. The Kohen ate it. The person who offered it ate it. Sometimes that person's family ate it. Sometimes that person's friends ate it. It all depended on what type of sacrifice it was. But you did not take a sacrifice and just burn it up. Right? That was extremely rare. It was
waste.
What?
It wasn't waste.
Right. It was to go close. Here's what you do. You take a cow, you bring it to the temple. The Kohen slaughters it in a holy place, dressed in a certain way. Excuse me. Acting in a certain manner, right? And you are repenting, or you want to get closer. And by doing that, you eat of it in the holy place with your friends, with your family, with the Kohen, and you sit at a meal and you bring each other, closer to God. Excuse me, and that's the whole idea behind it. It's got nothing to do with sacrifice. It's just that our frame of mind in English is It's similar. You take an animal and you kill it and you cook it. But basically what we're doing is ritual barbecue. That's really what it is. It's much more similar to a barbecue in a holy way, where the food is eaten in a holy place, in a holy manner, with holy thoughts and holy ideas, than it is a waste. Like in the old Tarzan movies, you used to see those movies where they go into the a hollowed out mountain. You'd walk into this mountain and it'd be like a million of these native people. Of course, they would throw it in there, fire, and they'd all be cheering and stuff. That was done. It was done. It was done in Israel. Non-Jewish groups did this. They had. We talked before about the Baal. The Baal was a Moloch, for instance, was a god, a foreign god, an idol. That the way you worshipped it was it was made out of iron, and you heated it up until it was glowing red. And they would take these drums and they'd beat the drums into people are in a frenzy, and they'd take their children and they'd put their children on the arms of this idol, which was glowing red hot, and it would kill their children. And that's how they worshiped the idol. And you have an explicit line in the Torah that says, do not offer your children to Moloch. Do not do this. Right? It's a horrible thing. But people did it. And people had all kinds of gods that they did rituals to. And Judaism said, they tested all of them. They were all, forms of paganism, where they would worship gods, and basically there was their way of manipulating gods. They only had two types of gods in the ancient history. They had gods you could manipulate by giving them sacrifices or doing things that they wanted, which today, that's a person thinks that's a psychosis. Like crazy people think that today, but people believed it then. That was one way that they practiced their religion, was by offering things to the god. It was like bribing them. You're bribing God. And the other one is that you're offering things to your God as a way of getting him on your side, that he would forgive you for something or overlook something that you did, and therefore everybody would have a good year. So either of those two things, those were both terrible things. People did terrible things. They'd kill people that way. And you had Greeks who their gods were humans. They were superhumans, right? Zeus and all of these things. They're superhumans. They had affairs, and they did all kinds of things wrong, and they murdered each other, and they were jealous of each other. They were just human beings with superpowers, so they would bribe them. You can bribe a person like that, and that's what they would do. And their gods were no better than them, so therefore they could do whatever they want. Our God does what it wants. We can do what we want. Right? So those are the two types of ways that they worship gods, and we don't have an idea. We don't give a sacrifice to bribe God. We give a sacrifice to bring us closer to God, to help us get closer by our ingesting it, eating it in a. There's a difference between going to a restaurant and buying food and eating it when you're walking down the street, and going to a nice restaurant where you sit and you have a nice meal with people in a sophisticated way. That's what a sacrifice is. Something like that. But everything Judaism towards religion, nothing was just for your taste or for you. It was for the religious purpose, and it brought us closer. So all of this whole idea of sacrifices is very different. That's why when people say that sacrifices were, they were like vulgar and things that we should never have done such things. That's because they don't read the book. Right? I have this all the time. Well, I was with somebody last week, and a guy comes and he says, "Do you people believe everything that's written in every book?" So I said, "Well, as far as I'm concerned, we don't believe anything that's written in any book, including the Torah. We critique the Torah." I said, "But it's been proven right." I said, "Every time, right?" Yeah, you don't believe it, right? Yeah, because I've never read it, and he's never read it. So how will you know what you don't believe if you haven't read it? Right? At least read it, and then tell me why it's stupid. If you haven't read it, you're stupid, right? Any person who it's like, and I understand that I'll drive a car even though I don't understand an internal combustion engine. I have no idea how it works, but I'll drive it, right? But I'm not going to critique it and say it's stupid. It works. I know it works. But even though I didn't read it. But this fellow doesn't read it, and he thinks that he can make light of us, right? When, in fact, I've read it, and I say you shouldn't believe it, you should critique it and argue it. And that's what Jewish history is. That's why people say rabbis are so argumentative. Because we do is that we use logic to argue with our own books. And then but the fact is that we've never proved it wrong over all these years. You have book upon book upon book, where each book is attacking the book before them. And no one has been able to disprove it. They've always ended up with an answer. And that's why Judaism is so amazing. It's like very little of Judaism is belief. Most of it is knowledge. Right? But there is some belief. But it's like I have 1,000 questions, and 999 of my questions were answered very logically. The last one, I can't get an answer to. So if I'm intellectually honest, I probably should accept that it's true. But now I'm arguing as a believer rather as a non-believer.
But the issue would be too, you ask 10 different rabbis at the same point, you can get 10 different answers. So who do you believe?
So what's important is that you get 10 different answers, but never in anything of substance. Like nobody says Shabbos is on Sunday, and nobody says pigs are kosher. They might say that Shabbos will last 60 minutes after sunset. This one will say 40 minutes after sunset. But they're both right. Right? That point is that if you have a method to how you do things, and you follow through in every area that philosophy, then you have the basis. Judaism says you have the basis to follow it that way. You have cases where the two probably most famous schools that fought with each other were Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, Hillel and Shammai, these two schools, right? Shammai was much stricter than Hillel. According to our belief that Hillel was right almost every time. But there was a difference in one area of the laws of marriage and divorce, where that if you believe like Hillel, and you found a woman who was from a family from Shammai, she very well could be a mamzer. According to my beliefs, she might be a mamzer. And yet it says that they married each other because they understood that you can have more than one way of practice within certain boundaries as long as they're legitimate. Right? As long.
What's your decision on who you want to listen to?
Well, it's your decision. In addition to the training you've had, your family background, like I'm less strict in certain areas than a Lubavitch Chassid might be. I'm strict in other areas where they're not, but they're right and I'm right. That's the beauty of Judaism is that Talmud says that there are 70 interpretations for everything, and they're all true. It's all a matter of, like, you can't go shopping for lenient opinions all the time, and you also shouldn't go shopping for strict opinions all the time. You have to find a philosophy, and you keep that philosophy. And what you'll find is that from the Talmud, right, 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, till today, you don't find a single argument that is of such substance that it would disqualify the other. And nobody is on Sunday. Nobody says kosher pigs. Nobody says that Passover is in June. Like they might say that on Passover you can put water and flour together, and others say you can't put water and flour together. Okay, right? But you follow your way and you do it. That's really how it works. A lot of people who haven't read will say, as their answer will be, your question will be their answer. Yeah, this rabbi says you have to do this, one says you do that. They're all wrong. They're not all wrong. They're all right. Right? But you don't understand the issue, right? And so people just discount it. The bottom line is, people who don't want to follow it won't. What can I do? That's how they are. You can stand people who don't want to give up whipped cream, and they're going to. People who don't want to stop smoking, you're not going to stop smoking. You got people who stir up and down that cigarettes will not cause cancer, and that it's just a farce and it's made up. Right? And when they die of cancer, they'll still say it wasn't the cigarettes.
To justify what you want.
Yeah, that's how people are. And you can say it about us too, except we are constantly critiquing it. We're constantly fighting it. We're constantly taking the opposite side and saying, this Rashi doesn't make sense. The Torah doesn't make sense here. The Talmud seems to be ridiculous. What is it talking about? Okay, thank you all very much. And we hope that I hope that I'll see you all soon.